against my life. I met with the local police department. We talked about the potential response time if there was an incident, and I determined that the best course of action at that time was to purchase a handgun, which I did. I went through all the proper gun safety courses, I went through background checks extensively, and I purchased that gun for my protection. So I do believe there is a place in society where there needs to be the balance that is being discussed here, but I do believe there's a right of protection in the Second Amendment.
Interesting. You're forcing me to vary a bit because obviously, even within our society, we have the right at times to protect ourselves, and given the proper registration, given the proper police procedure, people do have the right to carry concealed weapons. But I think the question from a broader perspective is, do people have the right to have guns just simply to protect themselves and just have the guns for that reason? Let's carry this a little bit further logically. If I was now in my house and somebody came in with a gun, sure, I'd want a gun to protect myself. If I was outside and somebody else had a gun, I'd want a gun to protect myself. I'm from Brooklyn, back in the old days. And back in the old days, way back in the old days, when we had a fight, it was always fists, or maybe once in a while a chain. Fast forward 10, 15 years, maybe knives. But now, whether it's in a disadvantaged neighborhood or not, if somebody has a gun, everyone around is going to try and have a gun in order to protect themselves from that person. So the answer is not to have everybody have a gun. The answer is to eliminate that many guns, and people that do not have the right to have guns should not have guns. So once again, it goes back to gun control and criminalizing the right, or the criminalizing assault weapons again, and having enough protections of all of us so that we reduce the number of guns. And let's look at examples like Australia and some of the other countries.
I'm going to have to cut you off, sorry, a lot of time.
So again, because I come at this from a mental health and a public health and social work perspective, I always tell people I will fight vigorously for your right to bear arms, but what I will not fight for is your right to use the excess supply of arms in this country to impact children and everyone else's public health. We're in this journey together. So what I would say to a concerned constituent, is what I would say to anyone that's having a panic attack, an anxiety attack, or, struggling with a crisis. And I would say, what is the most immediate fear that you have? And we would talk about that fear. But one of the things that I would be working on to try to get that concerned constituent to think about is if they are living in a home with an abusive partner, the risk that having a gun in that house means to their ability to live in the event of an escalated dispute. If they have a gun in their home and they have a teenager or a young adolescent, a young child that is struggling with mental health problems, depression, impulse control, deep anxiety, or having a break, a psychotic break, what is the risk that that child will be alive if that gun is in the home? Because one of the statistics that we do know is when a gun is in a home, the probability of death or use of that gun by someone in the family comes from that home is exponential. And the other thing that we have to think about too is if you have a gun and you have a family member or someone in your immediate community, a loved one that is suicidal, has begun to ideate and think about using that gun to end their life, what happens when you facilitate that outcome by having that gun in the home? So I would sit with that concerned constituent. I would ask them what their fears and anxieties are. I would explain to them the risks, and I would try to see if we could have a partnership. But the first thing I would do is say, I sit and I understand and I'm listening. and we would work together to try to find an outcome that would hopefully result in the giving up of that gun. Thank you.
I think it's important to note that what you were saying earlier about your carrying a gun and your reasons for it, that's an example that could be quite valid. But think about it. What you were talking about was not getting a semi-automatic. You were talking about a handgun. You were not talking about not going through the normal procedures of background checks or education, etc. You did everything correctly. And therefore, I don't know if that's necessarily a problem in that circumstance. One thing we all have to realize is that there's exceptions to every rule. And that's why we have to create rules that are somewhat elastic. Obviously, we want to make sure that people who may need protection, depending on a number of factors that we could go into, are able to do that. But really, we are allowed to protect our homes. Some people, I don't know, for some reason what comes to mind is somebody in the Diamond District in New York at 2 in the morning or whatever. They may feel a little more comfortable having a handgun because the incidence of criminality at that point is fairly high. But that doesn't mean, and what we're talking about today is not the handgun. What I believe we're talking about is the weapons that are only around for one reason, which is mass murder. There is a Second Amendment, it is on the books, we do have to respect it, but understand and keeping the distinction between, once again, the Second Amendment and the NRA. So I think that what we do is certainly, Ms. Harris is right, and there's a huge psychological component that has to be made with individuals, and there's another question further on down where we can speak more to it. But there may be circumstances where someone needs a gun, and they should not be necessarily deprived of that. But it has to be within the confines of the Second Amendment and not something that can be used for mass murder.